Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, also called the Miracle of the Andes, was a flight traveling to Chile from Uruguay. The airplane wasn't in the air for too long before it crashed in the Andes Mountains on October 13, 1972. Rescue efforts only lasted 8 days, and the wreckage of the plane wasn't located for more than 2 months. Of the 45 people aboard the plane, 29 people survived the crash, but only 16 people survived the entire ordeal. The incident garnered international attention, especially after it was revealed that the survivors had resorted to cannibalism. The Fairchild was not built to fly higher than approximately 22,500 feet, so the pilots plotted a course south to the Pass of Planchon, where the aircraft could safely clear the Andes. Approximately an hour after takeoff, the pilot notified air controllers that he was flying over the pass, and shortly thereafter he radioed that he had reached Curaçao, Chile, some 110 miles south of San Diego, and had turned north. The pilot, however, had misjudged the location of the aircraft, which was still in the Andes. Unaware of the mistake, controllers cleared him to begin descending in preparation for the landing. Shortly thereafter, the Chilean control tower was unable to contact the plane. At first, none of the passengers panicked. Few even showed much alarm. Most of the 45 on board were in their late teens and early 20s, members of a rugby team travelling from Uruguay to play an expedition in Chile, and they whooped and hollered as the plane hit turbulence over the Andes and dropped several hundred feet. Then, the plane hit a second air pocket and dropped some more. And now suddenly, as it fell beneath the cloud cover, the passengers could see a mountain face just 10 or 20 feet away. Is it normal to fly so close? Panchito Abal asked his friend Nando Parado. I don't think so, Parado replied. Then suddenly, and without warning, his world went black. When he awoke, almost 48 hours had passed, and the flight of 571 had crashed into a glacial valley high in the Andes. The tail was missing, cut away from the rest of the fuselage by the right wing, which had sheared off after hitting a mountainside. 7 of those on board had been sucked out of the fuselage before the plane had crashed. 4 more, including the pilot and Parado's mother, were killed upon impact. And by the time Parado regained consciousness, a further 5 had also perished to their injuries, including the co-pilot and Parado's friend, Abal. There were now 29 survivors alone in the bitter cold of the Andes, and with no way of contacting the outside world. A search for the missing plane was launched, but it soon became clear that the last reported location was incorrect. Rescue efforts shifted to the Andes, and the survivors later reported spotting planes flying close by. However, their plane's white fuselage easily blended in with the snow, and rendered them invisible to any would-be rescuers and made detection extremely difficult. Furthermore, the harsh environment led many to believe that there were no survivors. After just 8 days, the search was called off. Those who had the strength and awareness to do so immediately began tending to the more seriously wounded. They piled up airplane seats to create shelter in the broken fuselage, where they huddled day and night. They used aluminium from the seat backs to warm up snow and provide a steady stream of drinking water. But their rations were woefully inadequate. One morning, Parado later wrote he found himself cradling a single chocolate-covered peanut. On the first day, I slowly sucked the chocolate from the peanut. On the second day, I sucked gently on the peanut for hours, allowing myself only a nibble now and then. I did the same on the third day, and when I finally nibbled the peanut down to nothing, there was no food left at all. All food supplies that mainly consisted of candy and wine were consumed within a week, and in the high altitude of the Andes, it was a matter of time before their bodies consumed themselves completely. After a lengthy discussion and much debating, they came to a bleak realization that they only had one choice. Using a shard of glass, some of the survivors sliced thin slices from the buttocks of one of the corpses, and silently they began to eat. Some resisted taking that fateful step for as long as they could, clinging to hope that they would be rescued. But then they found a transistor radio, and a small group listened intently as a Chilean news bulletin announced that official search efforts had ended. One of the survivors shouted to the others, "Hey boys, there's good news. They've called off the search." "Why the hell is that good news?" yelled one in response. "Because it means we're going to get out of here on our own," he replied. On the 18th day, disaster struck. An avalanche all but buried the fuselage, killing another 8 survivors. Those remaining now had the grim realization that the only way of survival was to hike out across the mountains in search of civilization and rescue. It seemed an impossible task. None of them were mountaineers. All were now horribly weak, and they had no suitable clothing or equipment. But there was no alternative for survival. With just 16 people still alive, they fashioned a sled, sewed together material for a sleeping bag, and selected those strongest that would be able to survive the bitter expedition. On December 12th, after weeks of preparation and aborted efforts, 3 expeditionaries set out for help, although one later returned to the wreckage as he decided it was best to save on resources. The other 2 expeditionaries, Roberto Canaza and Nando Parado, set off west in the direction of Chile. Fighting the cold and crippling altitude sickness, they somehow ascended the nearest peak, all 15,000 feet of it, and then they began to survey their surroundings. They saw only more mountains and a valley that wound through them. "We have been through so much," Canaza said to Parado. "Now let's go die together." Desperately, they picked their way down the other side of the mountain and began to stumble along the glacier down below, trying to force themselves onward but weakening day by day until on December 18th, 6 days after leaving camp, they heard rushing water. It was the mouth of a river which they began to follow. The next day they saw signs of humanity: a rusted soup can, a horseshoe, cow dung, a herd of cows, and then finally, on the evening of December 20th, a man on a horseback on the other side of the river. The man indicated that he would return the following day as they were unable to swim across the river or properly communicate. The pair were painfully tired, and they decided they could wait on the cold riverbank, hoping their torment would end in just one more day. The following day, they were greeted by 3 more men, and Parado, unable to make himself heard above the roar of the river, tried to explain who he was by miming an aeroplane crashing. Even as he did so, he worried the men would think he were a lunatic and leave. Instead, one of the men tied a note to a rock and threw it across the river. "Tell me what you want." Parado, his hands shaking, began writing. "I come from a plane that fell into the mountains." He explained that he and Canaza were weak and starving, that 14 friends remained on the plane, and that they needed help desperately soon. As he was about to throw the rock back, he paused. Was he even strong enough? He summoned up the last of his strength and hurled the rock with all of his remaining might, and watched as it bounced on the river's edge and rolled onto the bank. The man read it and raised his hands as if to say, "I understand." Later that morning, another man appeared on horseback, this time on their side of the river, and soon they were in a cabin being fed hot food. Rescue helicopters landed, and while their crews clearly doubted Prado's story of scaling and descending the mountain, they set off with him in search of the plane. Violent turbulence battered and shook the helicopters, which screamed as they attempted to climb the mountain. As soon as they passed over the peak, fierce winds drove them back, forcing them to fly around the mountain and approach from the south, which disorientated Parado, who was filled with fear that he would not be able to find his comrades. Then suddenly he saw black specks in the ice. The 2 helicopters touched down, rotors still running, and took 6 of the survivors to safety. They dispatched a second rescue team to take care of the remaining survivors overnight until their ordeal too could finally end the following morning. At a hospital in San Fernando, Chile, Parado was relieved of his layers of dirty clothing and given a warm shower. As he was being toweled to dry, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He was skin and bones, a shadow of the athletic young man he had once been when he boarded the plane 2.5 months previously. But with each breath he took, he uttered 2 words to himself over and over. "I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive. Remember to click subscribe and thanks for watching.